FromSoft fans are known for being some of the most hardcore and intense, but also loving communities out there. And this was proven in no better place than the story of Stray Demon. Named after one of the big monsters from Dark Souls, Mr. Stray Demon was a fanatic FromSoft fan who would constantly post on Reddit about the upcoming release of Elden Ring. He knew everything there was to know about all the other Souls games, and relished the fact he could bring so much joy to others by talking about lore, making posters, and just genuinely being a great person to be around and making the community feel special. In a horrific turn of events though, Stray Demon's daily posts about Elden Ring started to slow down as the game's release date got closer, and other fans started to get worried. Multiple posts were made about Stray Demon's disappearance, until it was found out that on his Twitter account he had mentioned some major medical issues he was dealing with just before disappearing. It seemed clear that Stray Demon had sadly passed away just before the release of his most anticipated game ever, and as a tribute, the community created tons of heartfelt messages and social media posts about the man who just loved playing FromSoft games. At the final hour though, just as everyone was in the middle of mourning, Stray Demon returned in a flash of light to let everyone know that he was in fact having very distressing medical conditions, but that he was alive and kicking, and he would be joining everyone in the game within the coming days. He hasn't posted on Reddit since, but I was able to find a very recent post by him on his hidden Twitter account, so he for sure is still alive and kicking, and most assuredly has played Elden Ring. Long live Stray Demon. Throughout the lands between, we find many so-called finger maidens, who through the guidance of the two fingers, who serve the greater will, lead many great warriors and tarnish through their grace to the championing of the Elden Ring. But in the start of the game, you may have noticed a dead maiden sitting against a wall in a pool of blood in the church that we start in. We know this lady is a maiden because we are able to use her blood to soak Mog, Lord of Blood's favor in game, which is only activated with a maiden's blood, per the item description. So the question then becomes, what is this maiden doing here? And as we are reminded by multiple characters throughout the game, we are maidenless. So could this maiden potentially have been our guide that was killed right before the beginning of the game? There are endless theories as to who could have killed our maiden, including some of the demigods trying to remove your guide, or the scion just outside the church being the culprit. But for me, one of the most interesting has to be White Mask Vare, that annoying degenerate we meet when first stepping into the world. Without you even telling him, Vare is immediately aware of the fact that you have no maiden, and he makes fun of you for it, relentlessly. But even more damning, if you zoom in on his hands when we first meet him, they are covered in blood. Could it be that White Mask Vare murdered your maiden just before the game began, and now knowing where you will eventually come, is waiting for you to greet you and act as if nothing happened? The curiosity then would become his motive. After all, any good murder needs one. Well, as we know from discussions with Vare later in the game, he wants you to join the order he is a part of, the Knights of the Godwin dynasty. And in order to do that, he claims a member must kill their maiden, but that any maiden will do and suffice. So did Mare murder your maiden in order to grant himself access to this dynasty? And if he did, what other forces are at play? Could Melina somehow be involved? After all, if this was your maiden that was killed, Melina is the one who mysteriously comes to your rescue and acts as your maiden for the rest of the game. Whether or not Vare is the true killer, or if it really is your maiden, it seems to be heavily implied throughout the game that something more sinister is going on behind Melina, Vare, and the convoluted start to the game. For FromSoft veterans, the name Patches probably brings a smile or frown to your face. He is a renowned and recurring trickster character that has appeared in every Souls-like game besides Sekiro, and in each of the games, he is known for deceiving players into their death and misfortune using the allure of a tasty treasure. He actually made his first appearance in FromSoft's Armored Core 4 Answer from 2008, and ever since they have included him in almost everything. In the Souls games, players grew a love-hate relationship for him, as he would try to trick players into dying to steal their things, but if spared, he would also later help the players and provide some of the most useful items in the entire game. In Bloodborne, he had his potentially most frightening reveal when players found Patches head stitched onto a spider that was once again used to play a prank on the player. And in Elden Ring, Patches even has his own questline which he is involved in, but sadly it's not fully complete, maybe being saved for a future DLC or sequel. But nonetheless, once again, in Elden Ring, Patches is at it again trying to trick players into their death. For most players, Patches will first be found in Murkwater Cave, where he will initially try to kill you, but upon being bested, will ask for you to spare his life. If you do, you will find him in multiple places throughout the world, including the Volcano Manor just outside the main room, and also once again playing a trick on you at Mount Gelmir. For any player that stumbled upon these weird glowing rocks near the edge of the mountain, you may have wondered what these were and if they held a secret. Well, for anyone that missed it, if you actually walk by and investigate each of these rocks by the cliff face, a cutscene will play where Patches comes up behind you and kicks you off a cliff.
Well, if you really are that gullible...
You can hate Patches, but you can't argue he's one of the most memorable FromSoft characters of all time. Every FromSoft game, whether it's Demon Souls, Dark Souls, Bloodborne, Sekiro, or even Elden Ring, has a hardest boss. And in Elden Ring's case, for almost everyone, this boss is Melania, Blade of Mikola. She can be found in the Halig tree, which is by far my favorite zone in the game. But don't let its beauty deceive you, because what lives at the end of this massive and sprawling zone is a warrior donning red hair and a glory unlike any other. Daughter of Radagon and Marika, Melania boasts a massive katana, fast movement, massive AoE attacks, and most annoying, lifesteal on every hit. For many players, this boss proves to be the one that makes them quit the game. But luckily, there is a feature in the game that allows you to have other players join your world for but a moment to join you in battle against great foes. Because of this, many players wait outside of Melania's boss battle in hopes that they will be called upon by other players to help them wage war against her. But none of these stories tops the one posted by Reddit user U22Zipa. After 20 to 30 Melania attempts and getting to 15% several times, I finally decided I would try summoning and bum rushing with 2 others and just getting it done. So I popped the finger remedy and approached the first sign I could. It was a man, wearing nothing but a jar in his head, holding 2 katanas named Let Me Solo Her. I considered against it, but I was curious, and who am I to deny his wish? The man took no damage except for some rot on the flower attack. He was flawless, and put all of my attempts to shame. I definitely didn't kill Melania, but either way, she is dead. Thank you, kind stranger, even if you will never see this message. This post was followed up by yet another, but this time by the actual Let Me Solo Her player himself, including a video of him soloing the boss for many different gracious players. He used no overpower abilities, no cheese strategies, and even taunted the boss with emotes as he went on. It was a display of Elden Ring at the highest levels, a man who had dedicated himself to the blade and become so powerful that his only option left was to live on as a legend. And most surprisingly, his character was dressed in nothing but a giant pot for a helmet and 2 swords, with the rest of his body being completely exposed with underwear. Both of these posts absolutely blew up on Reddit, and overnight, the biggest Elden Ring meme was born. And to this day, the legend of Let Me Solo Her carries on, and he still joins games to help other players take down the boss, with many creating fan art and stories around his triumph. The world of Elden Ring is host to a myriad of strange and interesting creatures, all with their own lore and backstory. And at first glance, one of the most mundane versions of this would be the Jellyfish, but that's only for players that don't discover the secret behind Aurelia. You see, Aurelia is a spirit summon we can get early on in the game at the Stormhill Shack ruins, where a woman is lying on the ground who offers you this giant jellyfish who can help you in battle. Besides the fact that the jellyfish can come in very clutch in a lot of fights with her ranged attack, the summon is actually hiding a secret sister named Arlette, who you can find near the mountaintops of the giants at the end of the game by the Stargazer ruins. If you summon Ariel next to this lost jellyfish, they will talk to one another and embrace the fact that they have been reunited after all this time and disappear into the stars. The interaction not only unlocks a handy talisman, but also is one of the most hidden and heartwarming moments in the entire game, watching 2 sister jellyfish reunite with one another after being years apart. Where this theory starts to take a crazy turn though, is that some players have actually found 2 tombstones in the mountaintop cemetery sitting right next to each other with the same names of Ariel and Arlette, belonging to 2 children who died early in their lives. This strongly implies that those 2 original spirit jellyfish are not jellyfish at all, but in fact, children who have passed away and been reincarnated as jellyfish spirits. This opens a new can of worms though, because it begs the question, are all jellyfish in Elden Ring the reincarnated souls of children? And if they are, what is going on here? Is some sort of cosmic horror happening to these children upon death? Or is there a happier tale on the innocent souls of young being spared from the life and death and instead living a peaceful existence? Melina is one of the most mysterious and important characters in all of Elden Ring. We originally see her at the very start of the game with Torrent, where she finds us and tells us that we are destined for a great journey. And throughout our entire time playing the game, she guides us on our path to claiming the Elden Ring, at one point even choosing to sacrifice herself in the Flame of Ruin and the Goblet of the Giants, as a catalyst to burn the Erd Tree to let you inside. But as many players might not know, this is not the only thing that can happen here. If players decide to go for the lore of the Frenzied Flame ending, where you meet with the Three Fingers and brand yourself to become Lord of the Frenzied Flame and take on the Flame of Ruin yourself, Melina will instead leave you and turn against you at the end of the game, where she will suddenly change her appearance to this, something much more sinister. If we zoom in on her eyes, we notice that she is bearing a striking resemblance to Ranni, as pointed out by YouTuber Bandit Games, donning a crow's feet tattoo on her eye, just like Ranni does, which for those of you that don't know, signifies death, and more importantly, bearing a gloomy purple eye, something that sounds eerily familiar to a lot of lore we can read about in item entries in the game about a mysterious figure called the Gloam-Eye Queen. You see, the Gloam-Eye Queen, or Dusk-Eyed Queen as she is also called, was said to be the bearer of the Rune of Death itself, and led the Godskin Apostles in a venture to kill many great deities. But when Marika stole the Rune of Death from the Elden Ring and gave it to her shadow Malekith, the Gloam Queen herself seemed to have died along with it, implying that the Rune of Death may have been the actual Gloam-Eyed Queen herself. So years later, when Ranni then kicked off the events of the Shattering and stole a fragment of the Rune of Death that caused Deathroot to spread throughout the land through Godwin, could it be that this event actually birthed Melina, a reincarnation of the Gloam-Eyed Queen herself? We know in Melina's description that she was birthed at the foot of a great tree with her mother lying inside, which seems to be an obvious reference to Marika and the Erd Tree most likely. But this is confusing as Marika is the one that stole the Rune of Death in the first place, thus killing the Gloam-Eyed Queen. Where this takes a crazy turn is maybe this description is actually a reference to Ranni, and Ranni is actually Melina. Being birthed from Marika could make sense for Ranni, as she is the daughter of Radagon and Queen Rennala, but remember it is heavily implied in the game that Radagon and Marika are the same person, or at some point joined. So could this mean that Ranni, daughter of Marika through proxy of Radagon, was born near the Great Tree as a vessel for the new Gloam-Eyed Queen of Death, after the banishing of the Rune of Death itself? Could this explain why Ranni and Melina have so many similarities, like being some of the first people we meet, both knowing about Torrent, both helping us on our journey, and both having very similar facial features and matching tattoos? Is Ranni or Melina, or both, the reincarnation of the Queen of Death and Destruction herself, the Gloam-Eyed Queen? This would also perfectly explain why Ranni kicked off the events of the Shattering, as she wanted to bring back destined death to what it once was, and Melina could either be Ranni herself or the actual queen while Ranni is simply serving her. It also explains why in the Lord of the Frenzied Flame ending, where we essentially become an eternal being, Melina now vows to hunt us down, because as the Queen of Death, it is her destiny to now stop us as an eternal being. We can even read in the Deathroot description this paragraph. On the night of the dire plot, the stolen Rune of Death enabled the first death of a demigod. Later, the Rune of Death spread across the lands between through the underground roots of the Great Tree, sprouting in the form of Deathroot. So it seems as if Melina, Ranni, or both of them if they are the same person indeed, were birthed from the Erd Tree as the Gloam-Eyed Queen, and the reason they help us as the Tarnished is they need to set forth the catalyst to burn the tree and once again take over as destined death. An interesting theory, for sure. Based on the last theory about Melina and Ranni being the Gloam-Eyed Queen and Rune of Destined Death itself, it also starts to make us beg the question, What role did Marika play in all of this? You see, we know that after the events of the Shattering kicked off by Ranni, Marika in retaliation broke the Elden Ring into pieces and the runes were scattered throughout the lands between. It's been assumed that Marika did this because she was angry at Ranni's betrayal, or was simply mad at how things were unfolding. But we also know that after this event, Marika was imprisoned with her husband Radagon, instead taking the mantle, and trying to repair the Elden Ring to no avail. Putting aside whether Radagon and Marika are in fact the same person, or just the same essence fused into one being at some point, this seems to point to the idea that Marika was not on the same page as Radagon, who being the main boss of the game proves he is fully loyal to the greater will. Could this mean that Marika was actually harboring many doubts as to the greater will's real motives? It would explain why she sent Godfrey, her first husband, away from the lands and forced him and the Tarnished to endure hardship to grow strong. It would explain why she broke the Elden Ring, and also why she stole the Rune of Destined Death in the first place. All of these actions could actually be some sort of grand plan by Marika to overthrow the greater will in some way, by creating an army of Tarnished warriors who will come back one day to take the Elden Ring and push the greater will from the land, all with the help of Ranni and Melina, who through the use of the Rune of Destined Death can wreak great havoc on the world. Could Marika, Ranni, and Melina all be colluding together to take down the greater will, who is being helped by the Elden Beasts, Fingers, and Radagon? In many ways, the idea spawns even more questions than it answers, but it does hit on the point that something very mysterious is happening with Marika, and it almost seems assured that she knows more than we're being led on to believe, likely being involved in some grand plan to potentially become a god herself. Another interesting theory proposed online by one extremely vigilant Reddit user, Le Bonjour, postulates that the entire map of Elden Ring itself is actually the body of Godwin, the first god ever killed during the events of the Shattering. This sounds crazy at first, but if you look at Godwin's decaying body in game, and then at the map of Elden Ring, the similarities start to make sense. For example, the great volcano of the map is placed directly where Godwin would have been stabbed by the Godkiller weapon. The Erd tree lies at his heart, and Liurnia his intestines, and so on and so on. So could it possibly be that the world of Elden Ring is actually directly formed from the body of a now dead god? The more likely theory is that Godwin's dead body began to form into the world around him as the Deathroot plague from his body began to spread, potentially stealing essence from the lands between and transferring it to the diseased and lifeless body of Godwin. Either way though, it's crazy to think that Godwin's literal body upon death somehow directly connected with the world and now in some way is a part of it, either changing the world and its formation or pulling from its essence to create something new.